Three, and we're on. Hello, Doc. Can I call you Doc? It's just
She
some
can, yeah.
sort of habit. Thank you. Um, Full disclosure, I saw your session at Publicis Group, and those 30 minutes instantly kind of made me go, I need to speak to this man as quickly as possible. And that was primarily my motivation because a lot of the things that you talk about are things that I personally have been looking into, though I don't have your experience or your expertise. Um, so thank you very much for doing this. And again, I said this before the interview. I'm going to say this again. I loved your book. So anyone watching this, get it. Uh, but your story has been extremely interesting for me. And before I get into that, I would actually like you to kind of take us through your journey as is, because I believe you switched in between from being a actual medical professional to a business professional, and now you're a health and wellness champion. So I'm trying to find that uh, pivot point, so to speak.
At my heart, I'm a science geek. I hope that came across in the book as
Oh
well.
yeah.
Yeah. I love human biology, the physiology and the psychology of what makes us who we are. And I've always striving for understanding how I can unlock the most value that I can from this machine and then help other people do the same as well. So my career really began with my first degree, which is in physiology. This is a University College in London. And I happened to be in the Air Force, Royal Air Force at that time. And that's when I saw for the first time, and I got to sort of work with these fighter pilots, just how incredible the body and mind is, where even under those intense forces of nature, those G forces that you literally get pushed around in those fighter jets, even in those high stress environments, they're able to make surgical level decisions with such precision as well. And that's where this sort of love affair with this area really began. I got a chance to do many expeditions in my younger years. I led an expedition to Mount Everest. I led an expedition to the Arctic Circle. I was invited to work at NASA on the human spaceflight program for a while. And then I went on to study medicine and graduated and was working as a doctor. This was all pre-2010. After that, the world changed when the Lehman Brothers collapsed. I'm not sure if you're old enough to, but a lot of our viewers may remember. Okay. I always got to remind folks because sometimes they forget just how tough those years were. But the world really changed. And at that time, I thought about what's the next phase of my life and my career look like. And I happened to have met a girl, and that story ended up really well because we're married now and we've got two beautiful young children who I dedicated the book to. And so I moved to India, and that's when I left the clinical world of medicine behind, and I increasingly became more and more involved in the business, the management, and the operational side of health, medicine, and more broadly, well-being, because my journey individually began to change. I became a father. I got into long-distance running. I started to experiment with what I eat, how I eat, when I eat, stuff I'm sure we'll talk about on your show around as well, intermittent fasting, etc. So I went through this whole journey of management consultant, venture capital, corporate, and then entrepreneurship. That's what I've been doing over the last 10, 12 years since moving to India. But things changed again. COVID-19 has changed the world. And I decided that I had a skill set, medicine, and it needed to be deployed. So I became a frontline volunteer. I was working for the BMC. I live in Bombay in India. So I started working with the BMC, working in slums across the city. And I saw firsthand the devastation that this was creating to people's lives and livelihoods. And I did that for about 4 months. I then got infected with COVID and I was pretty badly hit by it. So it took me some time to get back on my feet. But this time around, again, my wife and I were very busy. In the last week alone, we've been at the front and center of Indian news with the new mission that we launched just 2 weeks ago called Meds for More, which is a campaign to collect unused, unexpired COVID-19 medications from people that are living, started in Bombay, but now we're spreading to 5 other cities as well. So collecting from the metros and then give it to people who don't have any affordability or access in rural India. Right. And we've been inundated with donations, medical donations, to make those available for people. So we're trying to do our best. And I just think that health and well-being is something that, because I'm so passionate about it, allows me to play out in so many different spheres of my life.
I'm going to geek out with you a little bit because it's something that I've now...
That's why I'm here. Yeah.
Full disclosure, I've recently got into the more health and well-being, the more holistic side of health and well-being. I've been a martial artist for about 10 years. And that has been my primary practice. So my exploration into body and mind primarily was just martial arts. Mindset came much later. And now as I see it, well-being and health and well-being just has such a broad definition, which I never realized. And I'm sure that a lot of people listening also have not been able to really get a hold on what it truly means. So I'm going to ask you this, like how would you define optimal health? How would you define optimal well-being? What are the factors one needs to consider? Because I don't think it's going to be just how much exercise I can do or how well I eat.
For me, life is about being happy, healthy, and long. That's the objective. That's what I'm trying to do for myself and for everyone around me as well. We understand that well-being is a pretty complex conversation. So I set out and I built a framework for myself a few years ago, and this was built so that I could decide where I wanted to invest my energies over the next however many years. I hope to live to 120. I'm certainly planning to do so. So I got lots of things that I want to do along the way. So there are 3 concentric circles, and I start with the well-being of the individual. Who we are at a personal level. It then goes to well-being of the organization or the team, and then it extends to the well-being of a system, of a country, of a planet. So I am pretty much divide my time equally amongst each of these 3 spheres, right? From the companies that I founded and I run, through the academic work that I do, through the content creation or the media interactions that I have as well. Because I think it's very important for it to be done across all 3. And it actually allows me a pretty unique vantage point, because I am equally involved in activities involving the World Economic Forum and the Atlantic Council, through to international publications, through to startups that are working in different parts of the world, through to my media and writing work, that it allows me to connect the dots and do things. So even now, I'm running this NGO mission, Meds for More, which is a very India-specific intent to help us with COVID. Of course, we're having this conversation about my book, which is very looking at holistic well-being, fueling peak performance. I'm currently writing a white paper on how we can feed 1 million people when we get to Mars by the year 2050, working with some people from the Atlantic Council and at NASA. So I've got all these different things, and many, many more that I won't even get into. But as I said, it just allows me to pull the threads together, because there are some very similar core things that we each need to do. We need to sleep and recover and rest well. We need to eat well. We need to move our bodies. It requires movement, not exercise. We need to move our bodies. We need to look after our brain and our mind. So there are some common things that we need to do. And then, of course, it extends outward and outward. We need to look at community. We need to look at planet. We look at sustainability, etc. So lots of other things there.
Could you touch upon each of these? Because one thing that I noticed was, so I had the pleasure of speaking to a person who's a sleep coach. Apramay Rajput was one of the guests, and he thankfully shed very specific light on sleep. The physical side is something that the internet is full of, right? And thank you for saying that, not just exercise, movement as a whole, but all of these other elements, brain health, for example.
Yeah.
What all would it constitute? Are we talking about nutrition? Are we talking about consumption in terms of content? Are we talking about brain chemistry? Are we talking about mindset, for example, or are we talking about things that may not necessarily go into the bucket of rationale as people understand it? It could go into some esoteric things or belief systems. So, if you
Yeah.
could elaborate on that, I think that would help understand this better.
Yeah, I think it's important to consider the multiple dimensionality to this, right? It's actually something interesting. I haven't formally built out a construct to it, but I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was invited to speak at a forum where they were talking about the quantum state of physics and its application to human health, right? And they were looking at energy. And at the time, I remembered that thinking that, in med school, I didn't have a single lesson on physics. I mean, I love physics as a child. I think one of the first books I ever read, at least the memory of it, is A Brief History of Time by the late Professor Hawkins. But if you think about the logical nature of what that statement is asking, in medicine, we have created a very siloed set of systems, right? We started off with the organism as a whole. We then understood that, okay, each organism, through Da Vinci's early work, started to understand anatomical figures, and that there are systems in place, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, etc. Then we went a step further, and the microscope came in, and we understood that within each organ there were tissues and cellular lines which had commonalities and differences amongst different parts of the body. So that's the early work that we had. Of course, then penicillin and pasteurization and antibiotics and all of those things came about at the turn of the 19th century. Then, as we sort of went on into the mid 19th century, it went further still, and the work of Watson and Crick allowed us to understand that there was something happening within each cell at a genetic level, at a DNA level. There's a codification to each cell that then allows it to become further and further out. And then we've understood that even within the DNA, that's now through electron microscopy, we can see that it's made up of base pairs, which are amino acids. And we can now understand what an amino acid is in terms of the different constituents of that. And then if you go further and further still, ultimately, and you bring in the realm of quantum physics, and that even within each amino acid, there's an atom. Within the atom, there's a proton, neutron, and electron. Then within the electron, you've got quarks, and then you've got different types of quarks, and then now you've got matter and antimatter, and then we're getting into ultimately string theory, which can be comprised on 12 to 17 elements, right? And energy and matter is the same thing. It's just the other side of the equal to sign. So what are we doing with medicine? The body is essentially energy, right? It's just the manifestation of energy and a construct of energy at a particular time stamp, but that time stamp will change through our lives. So if we are understanding that we are essentially energy, then why are we not adopting a more scientific lens of the application of energy to our health and our well-being, and the understanding thereof of what makes it who we are as human beings? And can we manipulate energy fields to our advantage? Now, we're doing that in certain therapeutics. In surgery, we're using energy. In some interventions, we're using energy. In diagnostics, we're using energy, etc. But still, at the other realm where we start to look at Reiki and crystals, and I'm not trying to justify the use of that at all, because I need to see the science, and I've never seen any science to allow me to be convinced of it. But all I'm saying is that we need to have an open mind to how energy and the other dimensions of who we are plays on our health and wellness, and not just restrict ourselves to things that we can quantifiably look, touch, and feel in the 3 dimensions that we exist right now, because we understand from quantum physics that actually we are more than just the 3 dimensions plus 4, okay, time, so 4. So that's where I think it's going to be really interesting to play out in the next 50 years, 100 years, etc. And possibly a medical school student in the year 2100 will have more lectures of string theory, quantum mechanics, and maybe some of these other energy manipulations, as we now have, that I had when I was there 20 years ago, of cellular biology, neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, etc.
I love how you mentioned that bit though, because it's something that I've been exploring as well. I have been trying to look at the more scientific explanations, or rather, I won't say scientific, the more rational explanations of, say, a Reiki or something along those lines, crystal and everything as well. I do have one for meditation, thankfully, because for the longest time, and I say this at 32, the time that I have actually started meditating properly was 2018, October.
Right.
Up until that point, it has always been something to me which never really made any sense. I'm like, what do you mean sit down and breathe? What is that going to do? But overall, like, apart from, say, the more spiritual experiences of what meditation can bring, I did begin to notice a few things which, obviously, because I'm not someone who has the understanding of the science behind it as much, but I can at least, the only thing I understood is, okay, brainwave change in brainwave state.
Yeah.
Do you think we're reaching that stage now where all of these things that we've considered, and I by no means use this as a blanket statement, of course there are caveats everywhere, but do you think we're reaching a stage where we're being forced to look beyond conventional medicine into some of these esoteric practices, or some of these practices that we may consider non-rational, say 2 years ago, to now where we're looking at it more objectively and saying, okay, there's probably some value here? Limited example would be meditation. Is there something else as well?
I think rather than being forced to consider, I think the technology is now finally catching up to the wisdom which has existed in our collective consciousness. Mm-hmm. If we look at 2 or 3 things which have become very sexy over the last few years: meditation, intermittent fasting, and rest and recovery, or the importance of sleep, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at any of the cultures separated through time in human history or geography, these 3 things have always played an important role, whether it's religion, whether it's different, as I said, cultures or geographies or nationalities, etc. And it's therefore quite interesting that now, and it was Eid yesterday, right? So even you look at such a large religion like Islam, or even Judaism, or any of those practices, Jainism, not eating, only eating between sunrise and sunset, and the Padushan and things like this. So I think it's really quite fascinating that now technology is allowing us to quantifiably justify these practices, and we can look at it on a cellular biochemical pathway that we can see that, okay, this is how this works. This is the signaling. This is the epigenetics. This is the downstream effect. This is the physiological effect. And now we can measure through randomized controlled trials that this is the benefit that it's having on your health today and your longevity going forward as well. So that's, I think for me, that's the interesting piece. It's not maybe that, yes, the media makes things sexy or the influencers are doing it every day and talking about it. But from the world that I operate out of, the science is now allowing us to truly measure the benefit. We can look at the physiological link, and we can see empirical data and an advantage to that to help us.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that has been confusing me, and there is, at least now, there is a research that supports almost any view. Like you spoke about intermittent fasting, for example. Intermittent fasting is a protocol, because I use it as well, has been very beneficial for me. But you also have people who are looking at it from that lens of, okay, all it's doing is looking at it from a calorie deficit. So like health has been equated to that calorie measurement. On the other side, in terms of just nutrition, there's keto, there's Mediterranean, there's plant-based or plant-dominant, and then suddenly you've got carnivore. And all of these apparently have exceptional health benefits. And the champions of each are calling the other one out, someone saying plants are toxic, and someone saying no, animals are toxic. I think I can, like, one name that comes straight away to mind is someone you've had the pleasure of speaking to, Dave Asprey, who I have been following. But I also look at these other people who are saying, no, the nutrition basics are absolutely simple. There's macronutrients. You only look at that, which is daily requirement, so on and so forth. Where does one begin to kind of unpack this? Because I get that as human beings, while yes, we are similar on a large scale as people, but when you go down to just the genetics of it, how I process food would be different from you. So where does one start to make these choices, or rather these informed choices on what is going to work for me and what is not going to work for me? Because of course, like we have this thing of the Indian diet as well. Like if you go, the closest example for me when it comes to, and I am again going to take a more sports specific route because that's closer to me. If I were to look
Yeah.
at an Indian wrestler, someone from an akhada, it's going to be milk, it's going to be ghee, it's going to be this highly dense foods which someone like me or someone else is going to look at, or a lot of your health and nutritionist coaches are going to look at, and they're just going to be like, what are you eating? Like this is terrible for your health, but it works for that person. So I'm really trying to understand that where is that common thread that someone can pull and say, okay, these are what these various movements talk about. The basic structure is this, and through here I can make an informed choice on what works for me and what doesn't.
Yeah. I think the elements of personalization are only going to increase in the years to come, right? There's some interesting home-based kits available for you to measure your microbiome. But even if you do that, there's very little that we can practically do with that information. There are home-based kits available to tell you what your genomic sequences is. In fact, I just did mine 2-3 weeks ago. But again, there's very little information that you can do with that practical information, right? You can measure your bloods. So what I'm saying is that there are a whole spectrum of tools which are available and which will increasingly become available, showcasing more and more minutiae towards personalization. What we're missing is that engine in the middle, which pulls in the information from all of these various things and then spits out, if you will, a recommendation for who you are based on your context, based on your environment, based on your objective intent right now, and based on some degree, of course, of who you are and where you want to get to. What I've seen is, broadly speaking, the genomic element of this plays between 10 to 20% a role, maybe 25% maximum. There's a very, and this is important for people to appreciate, because oftentimes I hear this from folks who I'm coaching or who I'm working with. Oh, that's just who I am. My genes are like that. My parents were like that. Family history. And I don't, I sometimes just want to shake them out of that rut and tell them, it's rubbish what you're saying, because the environment that you put yourself in, the choices that you make for yourself on a day-to-day basis, that will ultimately decide 80% of what you become over the next 30, 40, 50 years. And the sooner you start, the better it is. So let's just park that to one side. Let's just accept that this is an evolving piece. More and more will become available. But ultimately, I think the holy grail is that machine in the middle, which will pull all of this together. And by the way, there's some of the world's smartest minds working on this, including the biggest companies like Apple and Google and JP Morgan and IBM, etc. They're all trying to solve this, and no one has right now. So if anyone says that they have, please don't believe them, because it hasn't been. Right.
Yeah.
So then I look at it. Okay. So then what do I do? Right. What do I do at the individual level? And I've always tried to operate out of 2 or 3 fundamental things. Number 1 is first principles. Number 2 is everything in moderation. And number 3 is small things that can lead to long-term advantages. So first principles are, what is it that I can understand out of this particular sphere? And does it make logical sense for who I am today and where I want to go tomorrow? So let's take intermittent fasting or calorie restrictive eating. All right. There are many words for it. Now, what I've seen for myself is that if you look at 1 billion years of evolution, and I think Peter Attia does some excellent explanations around this, where you look at a single celled organism, you look at a multi-celled organism like yeast, you look at an animal model like mice, you look at a primate like a monkey, and hopefully human beings. And I'm going to be speaking with near Barzilai next Friday on TEDx India, and he will be talking about his TAME study. So if you look at 1 billion years of evolution, there is unrefutable proof to show that restricting the amount of calories in a particular day over a long period of time leads to an extension in your lifespan and your health span, both of that. What is missing is the prescriptive nature, the dose dependent curve to show for me, how much do I need to do? Do I need to do it 3 times a week? Do I need to do it 24 hours? Is 16-8 okay? Can I eat 600 calories? Can I eat 1200 calories? We don't know the answer to that, right? And there are many permutations. So people have to work them out for themselves. But what we know very clearly is that calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, whatever you want to call it, helps an individual and a population, multi-species, across every study that has ever been done over the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? So that's what I mean by first principles. Secondly, does it make sense for where I am today? Right now, I'm a father of 2 young kids. I may want to be running a marathon. I've got 2 startups that I'm running. I'm dealing with frontline issues around COVID-19. So there are many, many things of who I am today and where I want to go tomorrow. So does adopting this new behavior make sense for me now? Or do I just need to park it to one side and say, I'm going to get back to this, right? And so one of the new companies that I co-founded called Roots, it's called Roots.life. We just opened up for beta. So people hearing this can apply to become a beta user. And what we're doing is very simple. You decide what your intent is, and then we help you document that journey of change based on where you want to go over the next few months. And we've gamified it so you can work with a period of 4 other people. Sorry.
I'm going to sign up right now.
Yeah. You can work with 4 other people, and it's a really lovely micro community led initiative to help people create the change. And all we're doing is we're helping you document that journey. So you choose the intention, you choose the challenge, you create the challenge, you share the challenge, and then you work with common people like you because you're the sum of the 5 other people you spend time with, right? So that's an example of where am I today and where do I want to go tomorrow, and does it make sense for me? And the last thing is start small. And this is where I love the idea of biohacking. And Dave is great. I love reading about Dave Asprey's work. And we had a really lovely conversation and exchange notes as well. And yes, there's a place in society for people who want to do, whoever watched my show with him, whoever want to do, full body stem cell transplants that cost $170,000 and you got to fly to someplace in Eastern Europe. Or the fact that he's got these little pellets in his ass, which release testosterone over a period of time. So that's great. And there needs to be pioneers like him so that we can learn and apply it to a general population level. And Dave wants to live to 180, which is amazing. But what I want to do in my mere humanness is live to 120. And so I try and think about things which are really simple and easy to adopt. So I have 14 supplements that I take every day. They're pills, but it's easy for me to do. I can buy it on Amazon. I take them and I've seen and I've measured the response it has in my life. I've seen intermittent fasting. So I intermittent fast for 3 days a week where I skip my breakfast and I go straight to lunch. Once a week, I do a 24-hour water-only fast, right? And likewise, there are these little things that I do, the biohacks as I call them, that I do in my life. The temperature of our bedroom is always, when we go to sleep, set at 17 or 18 degrees Celsius, because that's the most optimal restorative temperature for your human physiology to relax and recover from. So we do these simple things which don't cost a lot of money, which don't take a lot of time, which don't consume a lot of willpower. But I believe when done in collective unison, leads to a great degree of change. And that's the second company that I founded called Human Edge, which is what the interaction that you were part of with the Publicist group, where I then share those programs such that if someone wants to adopt it, they have these tiny, tiny things through the day. But at an overall level, it leads to huge benefits in leadership longevity, workforce longevity, and life longevity as well. So that's how I operate. That's my operating system. And those are the rules that I try and live my life out of.
Thank you for sharing that because I'm having validation. But purely because for someone who's not from a medical background, such as myself, it's but is kind of looking at this as a way of helping other people as well. I think an interaction like this with you kind of just gives me an understanding of, all right, there are gray areas in this entire uh, I'm not going to call it industry, this entire vertical of health and wellness, and they're going to stay gray for a very long time. But it's not that you can discount one thing entirely and say, okay, no, this is absolutely wrong. I do want to ask you though, why is it? Because I haven't seen a lot of medical professionals um, share this specific knowledge or communicate about these specific things. Why do you? Where do you think that gap is coming from? And again, at the same time, you've got the other spectrum, which is health influencers who may not necessarily have the medical qualifications that, say, a you would have, or an actual medical professional would have, and are probably health coaches.
Yeah.
And they would have just an elementary understanding of, because I say so as one myself, whatever I learn is a very elementary understanding of physiology, of what nutrition can do for you, and things of that sort. But to actually see it on a cellular biological level under a absolute scientific microscope is something that a medical professional can do. They have the access to it and they understand it. Where do you think this gap is and why?
I think it comes back to the silos which exist in the way we train our medical professionals, and then what happens to them after that. So even if I look at the 6 years that I was in med school, I had one lecture on nutrition. I maybe had a collective teaching time of 15 minutes on the microbiome. And with all due respect, 20 years ago, the microbiome was nowhere near as known about as where we are today. Okay, so we'll accept that. But still, right? Nutrition, sleep, the importance of sleep. I don't think I even had a single lecture on the beneficial effect of sleep. We had one or two lectures on sleep physiology, sleep pathology, like narcolepsy and epilepsy and other types of things, and how you need to treat sleep apnea and how it leads to congestive heart failure and things like that. But we never looked at, what is the optimal REM time versus non-REM time? What are the physical applications that you need to have around you to enhance the efficacy? What is the relationship between the contributions of those four major stages of sleep and your ability to focus the day after or perform? All of these things which are just so intuitive in our day-to-day lives, right? Whether you're a physical athlete, whether you're a corporate athlete, as I call them, or whether you're just someone who wants to lead a happy, healthy, longer life. This is all important. So I think that's one thing that needs to be fixed. And what I really want to make sure I do when I have a little bit more time, maybe over the next 5, 10, 15 years, is spend time at med school and actually ensure that this learning gets translated into the teaching environment so that more doctors come out of med school with an understanding of, number one, the holistic nature of what life is, rather than just being healthcare experts, but just focused on disease and pathogenesis. Number two, with a appreciation that what you do for your patient outside of the prescription, which is the investigation and the drug, you can actually have a much bigger effect on their long-term health span and lifespan by manipulating these, let's just say they're called lifestyle, but they shouldn't be called lifestyle factors. These are hard science factors, like encouraging more sleep, encouraging micronutrients, movement, all of these things which I speak about in the programs, which you may have attended as well. So these are two really important things. And then you fast forward to where we are today, right? What is social media done over the last 10, 12 years? You become an influencer without any real justification for calling yourself that, apart from the blue tick, right?
Yeah.
Number of followers. And the blue tick and number of followers is reliant on how aesthetically pleasing your content is. This is a fundamental
game the algorithm.
This is a fundamental problem with social networks. And I encourage people, my co-founders and I, we wrote 3 pieces which are available on Medium. It's this one, which I'm particularly inferring to, is called Humanizing Technology. And if you go to Immunity Health, that's IMMUNITI, that's the name of our parent company, which Roots.life is part of. And we wrote, it's a 3,000, 4,000 page manifesto of how we believe social technologies need to be built for the next 20, 30 years, and how there's a complete misalignment between what tools we currently have available to us. You even take any of them, and I won't name them, but any of the digital meditation tools, and their metrics of success are number of downloads, daily active users, time spent on apps, and conversion rates from freemium to premium, right?
Yeah.
That's how their investors count success. But the ultimate stakeholder, which is you as a consumer, your metrics of success are none of those. In fact, it's fundamentally in converse to what you should be doing, which is your ability to be more mindful, or the degree of degree of focus, or brainwave activity, etc. That's what we've designed for, we hope, in Roots.life. And I'm not saying this to plug Roots. We're still building as we go. We're building the plane whilst we're flying it. But we understand that there is a misalignment. And this is the problem with social networks. So you got anyone who can become a social influencer, as you rightly said, but they shouldn't really be calling themselves influencers, because all they have are people who follow them. They're not talking from necessarily a position of authority. Saying that, there are many whom I respect. You know, people in India, like people like Shamal Villapji, right, who I believe is creating such incredible content, really operating from a position of knowledge and wisdom. And there are many, many others like that as well, right, who are doing this. So I think it's important that the user, the consumer, looks at these influencers with where they come from, what they're doing, and what they're trying to say, and then make some very informed decisions based on that.
Right. Thank you for saying that, because I have been looking at social media for a while, and it has impacted a lot of things, especially now. Like I see the power it has on both sides. There is that side of it doing some really good things, like the world is smaller. I can speak to you through through this. I would have probably not had the opportunity to, but I can.
Yeah.
But overall, I see it doing some good as well. So with that, I'm going to move to my second last question, which is how can one start on this? How can one start to make a few more conscious decisions about their health and well-being? What would be some factors you could recommend?
That's an interesting question. I have 3 simple rules when it comes to sort of the adoption of a new behavior or a mindset. Rule number 1 is start small, start today, which basically means, and again, I think you may have heard this when we last met through Publicis. We have goals and ambitions, and that's fantastic, right? People come to me, doc, I want to run a marathon, I want to lose 6 kilos, I want to get married, I want to lose weight, etc. Fantastic. Big goal, big ambition. We need to have that. But remember, within that is a set of behaviors. Within the set of behaviors is a series of habits. And underneath each habit is the adoption of these biohacks, these small, tiny steps, the micro steps, atomic habits, whatever nomenclature you want to adopt based on who you're reading or listening to, right? So that's the first thing. Differentiate between your destination and the journey to get you there, which is even the science behind Roots as a concept. Then we say, okay, now you start small, start today. So if you tell me that, okay, you know what, I'm going to work on running a marathon and I've done this huge plan for myself, and it starts with tomorrow me walking for 5,000 steps, I'll say you've got it all wrong. You need to firstly start today, because you need those 2 neurons to come together for the first time, which is the hardest step to make. And 67% of people who set themselves out for a challenge the next day don't even turn up at the start line. So make sure you start today and take it even smaller. Do it 3,000 steps, but start doing it today. Even start doing it right now while we're talking to each other. So that's rule 1. Start small, start today. Rule 2 is stack them up. So James Clear talks about this really beautifully. The best way of forming a new habit is linking it to an old one. So as you line up all these little biohacks for yourself around a central goal, try and make them connected to one another so that it's logical for yourself, it's sequential, and your brain has the least amount of resistance to overcome to adopt these in your day-to-day life. right? So that's the second rule. And the third rule is the importance of dopamine. It's such a powerful neurotransmitter. It celebrates success. It's the reason why alcohol is addictive, or smoking is addictive, or social networks are addictive. They all feed on dopamine. So use the same neurochemistry, but this time to your advantage. So whenever you do something good for yourself, celebrate it in an appropriate manner. That's how I recommend we all start our journeys.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And my final question, where can these people reach out to you? I'm going to leave everything in the description, but still.
Yep, I'm very active on social media. So all of my social handles are Doc M Ranney, which is my surname, Ranney. That's on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook as well. I'm more than happy to connect with folks. My book is called At the Human Edge. It's available in India at all the online stores, and it's now globally available as well. And hopefully in the next 3 months, as soon as I can get into the recording studio and finish it, it'll be available on Audible as well globally, as I said, hopefully towards the end of the year. So lots going on that, but social media is the best place that a person can reach me now.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for this, Doc. This is one of my favorite conversations. I get to geek out.
Good. Thank you for having me. And please share this with me, and I'll be happy to amplify it across the handles as well.
I will be, sir. I will be. I'm going to stop the recording, and we're